Yeah, I'll make a start. So my name's Toby. I'm a medical student and I run the chemistry program within Fraser's. I've been, I guess, I've sat GAMSAT 3 times, had varying scores throughout, and yeah, I'm currently living in Perth, but I moved from Sydney to study medicine in Perth. But yeah, I guess a bit of a spoiler here, building up to a score of 74. In my final sitting, I ended up with a score of 74. And through all 3 of my sittings, I had quite a lot of stuff going on, I think. Now, that said as well, quite a lot of stuff for me may completely, like, I guess, be minuscule in comparison to the stuff that you've got going on. And I know in particular, talking about people who have kids and stuff like that, there's a lot to do. And I think hopefully the messages that I talk about can be catered to everyone here. And I think regardless of whether or not you're actually doing a lot of stuff, if you're just doing GAMSAT by itself, I think the messages here can be helpful. And you might actually find that if you're just doing GAMSAT, I might be recommending you pick up something else while you're doing it. And yeah, we'll begin to talk about that. So who am I? So this is an old photo of me. I don't know if you can tell back when I was studying at UNSW in the second year of my program. So I did medical science at UNSW, and now I'm an MD3 student at UWA. I'm a proud dog owner. So this is Luna. She's a little 6-month-old Jack Russell that I've just gotten, and she's absolutely wonderful. Sometimes I keep her in the room while I teach, but she inevitably starts barking and then I have to let her out. But yeah, and this is her friend's, one of my good friend's dogs, Memphis here. But yeah, so proud dog owner, okay friend and partner. I think it's interesting with stuff like this. I think you're always like, yeah, I'm a good friend. And then you think about it and you begin to second guess yourself. So yeah, I'll just put that there. That's who I am. So I'm an aspiring clinician scientist. Now, what does that mean? That's someone who wants to, so I want to do medicine, practice clinical medicine. Then on the side, I want to do research. I think when we get into clinic and stuff like that, and when you begin to see patients, for instance, like people with cancer or people with rheumatological diseases like arthritis or like lupus or something like that, there are a lot of areas in medicine where we do things at an okay level. Like treatments may have absolutely terrible side effects, but despite that, they're still the best thing that we have. And I think as a clinician scientist, you're sort of in a position where you can work with a patient and just like, I guess, treat them the way that they need to be treated. But as well, if there's something that they're really struggling with, it's like, okay, these side effects are absolutely terrible. We can't use these medications for you because it'll make you extraordinarily uncomfortable. Then you're in a position where you can sort of speak with them and be like, look, let's make a clinical trial, or let's head into a clinical trial with this and get some other medication, which is still experimental, right? And I guess now we'll be working together to make sure that people in the future with this condition have better outcomes, right? And I love that, I guess, conversation, just being able to do things better and being able to work with the patient where, I guess, in that sort of scenario, you've both got the same power, right? You can't do clinical trials, you can't do research without patients. And it's really them who become the drivers of change. And I think especially when someone is having such terrible outcomes, being able to put not the onus on them, but giving them the ability to change the course of this disease for people down the track and make sure that they don't have as bad of a time as they may be having, I think that's really wonderful. So that's why I want to be a clinician scientist. And speaking of this, statistics is a pretty good tool to have if you're doing research, if you want to go into this sort of area. And I am a terrible, terrible, terrible statistician, right? This is something that I'm trying to work on. I'm trying to get on top of. I'm doing a research project right now, but it's not going amazing. Well, no, the project's going great, but statistics isn't amazing. So that's something I'm working on. And as I mentioned, I'm also the academic lead of chemistry for Fraser's. So every part of the Fraser's course that relates to chemistry, I'm responsible for putting that together, teaching the tutors how to teach it, looking at it and I guess thinking, is this the best thing to be teaching? Are there better things that we should be teaching? So part of that continual renewal process. And now this last point, I'm not a lizard in disguise, but I'll pose the question to you. If I was, this would probably be what I'm saying anyway, right? So yeah, I'm definitely not a lizard in disguise. I guess that's the point here. Okay, so timeline around my GAMSAT. Now, when was this? This was 2019. My first GAMSAT, what was I doing? I was doing a medical science degree, right? The Med Sci at UNSW, if I can spell. Right, so I was in the third year of my degree here. So I don't look, yeah, see, and that's exactly what I want you. Oh no, I mean, yeah, good point. I don't look like a lizard. Good stuff. So Bachelor of Med Sci at UNSW, I was in the third year of my program, right? And for me, that's when I guess the course starts off quite a bit structured. And then in the third year, you're doing all these electives, which other people may not be doing, right? And this was all the stuff that I had going on that I can remember. I guarantee you I probably had some other stuff, but this was, I guess this was the big stuff that I was working through. So I was working, let's start down the bottom. I had work. I was working full-time at a shoe store. Oh God. Now I've had a lot of jobs over, like I started off working at a pizza shop when I was 14 or 15, and then like I was a barista for a while, worked at a shoe shop, now I'm tutoring, lots of other stuff between there. But here I was working through really starting off in the Christmas period where they were quite demanding about when I had to be there. And it really, I was working casual, but the hours were 40-hour weeks sort of thing. And from December to end of January, I was working that sort of time frame. And then February and March, I was able to bring it back to around about 25-hour weeks, but I was working a lot here. And now what else was I doing? So obviously on top of this, I was doing GAMSAT study. Now I'd never sat a GAMSAT before this. And I was using the Fraser's course here, the like comprehensive back then. Now that said, I've got it starting off around about here in December. I was doing the comprehensive accelerated bridging course because I have poor organizational skills and I didn't realize that I should be doing it earlier on, but that wasn't a problem at all. But it was really compressed. So I guess all of this study was compressed starting late December, just after Christmas sort of thing. And for me, back in Sydney in 2019, that was around about, I think 9 a.m. to 10 p.m, both weekend days. And then I'd go to classes at like 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. every weekday, apart from one, I think. And that one day that I had off was really, really, really helpful because there was a lot of stuff going on. And yeah. So Elaine's just asked, what was my major in undergrad? So I had one major, but I did a bunch of other subjects. I did more subjects than I needed to because I'm just generally an interested guy. And I majored in neurobiology, but I was doing a lot of subjects in biochemistry and pharmacology as well. And it was sort of a scenario that if the program was aligned so that it recognized the subjects that I was doing, based on the volume of stuff that I did, I probably would have been able to get a triple major in these three. But I didn't pick the subjects to get majors. I picked the subjects because I was interested in them. Yeah. Good question, Miriam, actually. I'll chat about that in a bit. That's explained you'd be really good at chemistry. Okay, I'll jump to this a bit later on. But even with the biochem, the pharmacology background and everything like that, I wasn't good at chemistry when I started off doing GAMSAT. I was a typical med-sci student level, which is all that you need, right? It's really all that you need because I think especially studying for GAMSAT, we look at everything and think, I need to know this, 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 and this. And if we get a question wrong, we jump back and we think, okay, I've gotten this wrong because I didn't know enough going into it. When in reality, it sort of turns out that the case is, it's less so about what you knew, it's more so about how you worked with what you didn't know, right? And I guess taking the information that they're giving you and synthesizing that in a different way. So the reason why I actually picked to be academic lead for chemistry, because when I got the job, they asked me, that's like, which science do you want to do? And I was thinking, I was like, okay, bio is tough. There's a lot of stuff going on there. I think a lot of people find bio easy, but when you've got to explain it to someone, right, and account for everything, it's a lot more difficult. Chemistry, I think, is a bit more diverse because it sits in the middle between biology and physics, where physics is mathematics and I guess concepts on top of that. It's quite similar to what we'd expect in university level or high school level physics. But chemistry just sort of sits in the middle of the uncomfortable parts from biology and the uncomfortable parts from physics, and you've got this mess of stuff, right? And the reason why I did it was because I found it challenging. I think a lot of the things here that I was doing them because early on, I sort of developed the mindset that when there are things that I noticed that I could be doing, but for whatever reason I'm nervous to do, I'll force myself to do them. I'll throw myself at it. And I picked up so many skills by just throwing myself into scenarios. Like, I mean, I used to really, really hate public speaking. And I mean, I still come into stuff like this just a small bit nervous, you know, but like every opportunity that I had to do something public speaking wise, I would do it. And I'd force myself to do it. And then I'd build up that confidence bit by bit by bit. And yeah, and that was the exact same thing here. This is why I chose chemistry. It was the thing of the three sciences, it was the one that I was least confident with. And it was only really after I was lead that I realized I did know a reasonable amount of chemistry, but no one really knows much chemistry, even tutors, because I guess it's sort of an enigma where chemistry sits in the GAMSAT space. It seems a lot more difficult than it is. And even the people who get good marks, a lot of the time don't feel like they're doing well. And that's where I was, sort of thing. So this didn't help me nearly as much as we'd think it would have for my chemistry stuff. So yeah, I was doing GAMSAT study and this was quite intense. Now it was broken up into three components. I had the bridging courses, which were, I guess, working through for 4 weeks, just the background knowledge that I'd need to know. And then I guess developing a small bit of an approach. And then I had PBLs. Oh God, PBLs. And these were just problem-based learning classes where they give us questions to go through. And then we're able to talk through with like all the other students what each of our approaches were, and then think about how good our approach was. And that was wonderful because like it's when you're studying for the GAMSAT, right? Everything is sort of, it has to be introspective. You've got to look at not what is the correct approach to take here. It's what am I doing and what can I do to make my approach better? And your approach is going to be completely different from the next person's approach or the next person's approach after that. And I think it's so important to just be able to look at yourself and think, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? How can I buffer out things so that those weaknesses don't shine through as much? And how can I solidify my strengths? There are so many different questions where you can have 5 or 6 different approaches, which are all valid, which all get you to the correct answer. So this was sort of wonderful to be able to see what approaches are other people taking and then take on the positive things that I saw there and then leave on the side the things that I saw that were quite a bit difficult, right? So, and then I had 4 times 4 mock exams. And these were great because every Saturday or Sunday, I'd be going in and doing a mock exam. And the wonderful thing about this is that they were stressful. But then when I actually, 1 week later, really the 5th mock exam, the actual GAMSAT, once I got into the exam, it wasn't as stressful. It was just another thing, another exam. And that was really wonderful because as we'll talk about, and as you've probably heard and seen in other webinars and heard about other people talking about it, this is a stressful exam, right? So, that's what I was doing GAMSAT wise. Now, if we step up a level, now I had a big research project in 2nd year. And I was really fortunate. I was able to fly to Boston to present that. And that was absolutely wonderful. This was, I guess, where my initial love of research came from. And I think I'm a lot better person because this did happen. But I flew back just 2 days before my exams, and I was very fortunate. They let me defer my exams, and I only deferred 2 of the 4 that I had to hear. So I was doing study and then 2 deferred exams, really just a bit before I jumped back into study for GAMSAT. So I didn't have too much of a break here. But yeah, that's what I was doing. I think it was pathology and physiology 1B, the exams that I deferred, and then molecular biology and whatever the other one was, I still did there. I think it was pharmacology, the other one. So that's that. Now, what was I doing over here uni-wise? Now, I was, like I mentioned earlier, I throw myself at things that I don't think I'm too good at, right? And I loved, I guess, the Med Science Society at UNSW. It was super, super cool to see, I guess, this group of people together, sort of just having fun. And it was really great to sort of see them talk about things, like, because if you think about everything that the GAMSAT entails and how big of an exam it is and everything that there is there, then all you do is just get yourself stressed, right? And having, I guess, like a social setting where everyone was able to chat about like their doubts, like for instance, whether or not you think you'd be good enough at chemistry to do the GAMSAT. And yeah, so I was working through the society as a like committee member back in second year. And when third year came around, or the end of second year, they were going through the election process. And I was like, you know what, I've been here for a year. I love it. This has been great. Why don't I run for president? And I didn't think I'd get it, right? But I think I fluked it, but I really didn't fluke it that much. I was confident on the day when I was speaking and I was talking about some stuff that I was passionate about, and then people voted me in. So here I was coordinating the Medical Science Society. And I mean, if you're familiar with uni starting and like O weeks and stuff like that, when uni starts, this is a very, very, very intense time. There's tons of stuff to organize. We had a camp to organize. We had like a stall at O week. We had all the funding that we needed to get. At one point here, I think we were working out like whether or not we could get sponsorship with phrases sort of thing and other stuff there. And it was very, very busy, just sort of working out what to do, because it's in a scenario where I just didn't know what the right thing to do was. And I worked it out, but yeah, so I was doing that. As well as doing university. Now, this was when UNSW first moved to trimesters, right? So you do your subjects in one of 3 semesters, but they're compressed. So here I was doing neuroanatomy and molecular and cellular neurobiology. And neuroanatomy was a big subject. We had 2 labs a week. I think it has a reputation for being a very, very difficult subject at UNSW, maybe one of the most difficult. And there was a lot there. But I guess the big crux about this was that my mid-semester exams, I had one Wednesday, the week of my GAMSAT, and then one Friday, the week of my GAMSAT. And then the Saturday after that Friday exam was when my GAMSAT was, right? So there was a lot going on, right? I had these 2 final exams, or these 2 mid-semester exams, and then GAMSAT straight after, right? So tons of stuff happening there. Now, another thing that I had was a summer project. I was working in a research lab, working through some molecular cell biology stuff there. And this again came off the back of doing this project. I needed to do more research, or at least I felt like I needed to. I'd love to expose myself to it. So I did this summer project here. And we'll talk more about that further on. I also had a partner back then. And also as well, like in relationships here, we're thinking about friends as well and stuff like that. And I guess everything that there is to consider here, friends, family. And this is important to keep in mind. This may be a lot bigger of a section for people who have kids, or who have more complex family dynamics and stuff like that. And this is something always to consider. Right, so this is my timeline. I guess I'll jump into it a bit more, but does anyone have any questions this far? Now, there is one thing in the Q&A that I'll just get to. So they've asked, do you think doing arts, humanities, and non-med related electives, for instance, linguistics, Latin, is worth doing if that's what you're interested in? Could interviewers ask why you chose to study them instead of doing more science or pre-med units? Absolutely, right? I think the trouble is everyone sort of looks at the preparation process thinking about what I need to do to make my resume look good, or my, I don't know, portfolio, like when I convey who I am in an interview, what will make that look the best? And we'll look for things that will allow that to be the case. But it's less so about what you've done. It's more so about how you feel about what you've done and where that sort of fits in for you, right? So if you've done something like regularly for 3 or 4 years because you're passionate about it, right, then that's very, very good to see. The trouble is there are so many people who are doing things just to do them rather than because they actually enjoy it and because they're looking to help people out, right? I think if you want to do Latin, if you want to do linguistics, sorry, if you want to do like economics, like anything, and it's stuff that you're passionate about, that's something that you can and should talk about. Something that's really, really important is in medicine, like I'll scroll down a bit, but this is what my timetable's like. This was this week, actually. This was yesterday. I was invigilating a mock exam. I accidentally booked a private tutorial over when I was invigilating, like, but I've got all this stuff here, like classes for phrases, like 5 a.m. wake ups, because I'm in Perth and people over East wake up 3 hours before me. Like, I think amongst all this stuff, doing all this placement and all this work, if you don't have other things that you're interested in that can get you away from them but still keep you stimulated, it's going to be too much, right? And you can see here that I'm talking about when it's this busy, I'm telling you to add more things, right? For me, this week was intense, but that was bike riding, right? When I went bike riding, I was really able to air out myself, how I was doing, sort of thing. And I was able to get away from all this other stuff that I have to worry about. And here on Tuesday and Thursday, I took Luna to the park. Luna's my dog. And that was really important. And, oh, sorry, not Tuesday. That would have been Monday, because Tuesday was Valentine's Day. And I went to dinner with my partner. And then it was around about 8 p.m. And I didn't have much on until 8:30 a.m. the next morning. But we were just sitting there and thinking, like, look, it's been a while since we've actually done something. I know it's late. Let's go see a movie. So we watched a movie from 9 till around about 11:30. And that's quite late, especially with this to do. But I mean, I'm forcing myself to do other things that I'm interested in so that I can put up with all of this stuff. Now, another thing that I'm doing throughout here is I'm learning to code for statistics. And it's something that I don't have to do, right? I mean, this was my research meeting. All of the stuff, all of the study and all of like the research stuff that I do in the background that I'm just working through on my computer, that's actually not filled in here, but it's filling in all the blanks, you know? And like, they don't need me to learn how to code to do research, but that's something that I'm passionate about. And that's something that I think I could use as a skill later on. So I'm doing it. And that's great because it gives me a break from everything that's all the same, right? I mean, I've done this job working for 3 years. Placement's always going to be a lot to take on board. So doing other things that you don't have to do, but are interesting to you, is going to keep you pushing along, right? No, not everyone does developmental peds. I chose to do this because they don't teach us it that well. And I was thinking, I'm not going to know too much if they don't. But I guess to loop back around and answer the question that you had, do the things that you're interested in. That'll make you look like a better candidate, because people who follow their, I guess, passions and stuff like that, you become better doctors. The trouble is, I mean, if you were just the default doctor, you follow through the course, you do everything that they taught you, right? It's not as much about, like, I guess, doing the course perfectly. It's about becoming an ideal doctor, right? And there are so many things that you can't teach, like advocating for people, like, I guess, looking out for your and your friends' mental health, stuff like that. If you want to like start a society or start a group where you regularly go out on the weekends to do things to get away from medicine and stuff like that. Or with linguistics as well. One of my friends is a translator, and that is such a phenomenal skill to have in medicine, because there are so many scenarios where you get to like a place and there's a patient and they're just not able to communicate in English. Well, we're not able to communicate in English to them well enough for them to understand the complexity of whatever's going on to the degree that they need to. And that's such a wonderful skill for them to have, because it's filling the gap. And also, if there's any scenario when they can use the skill, they've got it there. And I think that's so important. Okay, I'm going to get back to those answers later on. So thinking about this timeline, right? Let's step into thinking about what went well. The things that went well here, I think, coordinating the society, that was a lot to do, but it was an awesome break to get me away from study and stuff like that. This was phenomenal. This went really, really well. Uni, I was quite fortunate. That went well as well. Despite my 2 exams in the week before the GAMSAT, that went really, really well. What else went well? I guess GAMSAT went pretty well, right? And the rest of them, not too sure, right? We'll chat about it now. What went poorly? So like in doing this, in juggling all this stuff, my relationship wasn't great. I mean, I didn't have too much time for my partner at the time, and it was difficult. Like, I mean, because I was doing so much stuff, whenever I sort of went to see her, I wasn't present because I was worried about like this and this and this and all of this stuff that's going on. And yeah, so that didn't go great. The deferred exams went pretty terrible, right? Now, I mentioned uni over here went great, but the deferred exams were not good. They are two of the worst subject marks that I've ever gotten. And I'll talk about why that was the case later on. The other thing that didn't go too well was the summer project. Now, as someone who was really, really enthusiastic, going into the project, I was just thinking about it and all the things that I could do, right? But I don't think I paced myself too much. I didn't think about what was reasonable for me to do, what the capacity I had for these things were. Yes, so 2019, this was my first GAMSAT sitting. Okay, but that said, I'll get further into that later down the track because I sat 3 times, right? So yeah, relationships didn't go too well, summer project didn't go too well, and the exams that I deferred didn't go too well. Now, looking at this, thinking about what went well and what didn't go well, you can sort of see that these are clustered together. The things that went poorly were over here, and the things that went well were around here. Now, I think this is sort of more related to my frame of mind between these two, I guess, time zones than any of the factors there. I think if you were to actually look at how I was doing from like a stress perspective, here, I mean, these deferred exams I studied less for than anything else that I ever really had. And that I didn't feel too good about that. And then that carried off into my summer project. I wasn't bringing in a lot of confidence there. And the relationship as well. I mean, that really carried on. So if you're thinking about the amount of stress and then also as well, like factor in like introspective judgment and stuff like that, where I felt like I wasn't doing too well, that was highest up here. And then GAMSAT was really a good outlet for me to be able to study, to be in a classroom full of people who we all had different skills and we had different, I guess, focuses and everything. And it was wonderful to sort of see like, oh, I don't know too much about what's going on in like section 2. I'm not too confident in my response. And then have another student in the class just say like, oh, I've run into that trouble before. This is how I solved it. Maybe that could help, right? And then vice versa, when we're working through section 3 stuff that I'm confident with, when they're struggling, I'm able to say, hey, this is my approach. I found this helps out really well. I really, like, I mean, part of the relationship stuff, a lot of the friends that I had actually came from this. They were friends that I was studying within the course. And that was wonderful for me. And that pulled my stress and self-judgment way, way, way down. And at least early on with the society coordinating stuff, working as the president there, that was initially good. It was stressful, but fulfilling, right? I was able to sort of look at things and think, this is difficult, but it's going well. Like, and I'm able to do things that wouldn't be the case otherwise. So if you're looking at why these things went poorly and why these things went well, it's more so a factor of how stressed I was, how self-confident I was, rather than actual this stuff here. And now, just to answer a question that's been thrown through to hosts and panelists here, are you naturally good at juggling many plates, or did I force myself to add more plates to make me raise my level? Now, 2 things. So initially I said, I throw myself at things that I'm not too good at so that I can get better at them when I recognize that's something that I want to get better at. That said, I mean, I don't know if I would call myself good at juggling a lot of things. I mean, look at this. I mean, this was it's a 3-year relationship that I was in here, and we broke up. And I think a lot of it kicked on from all the other stuff that I was throwing my time to. Here, stuff that I was stressed about, and here, stuff that I was doing really, really well, but I just wasn't able to juggle it perfectly with this, right? So I think it's easy to sort of look at this like, oh, wow, you did so well. But like, I don't know if that's true, really. And the thing is, I guess the amount of things that you juggle is not as much set for everyone, or not as much a choice. It's set for a lot of people. Like if you've got kids, that is not something that you can choose to to leave. I mean, you can reach out and get help maybe, but like things like daycare costs a lot, sort of thing. And I think I was really, really fortunate in this scenario where everything that I was doing, probably apart from work, was voluntary, right? I was doing these things because I wanted to, and maybe uni as well, you can chuck that in there. But like these were things that I did on top of them. And I think if we were to all chuck ourselves at all of these things that I was to do, then you might also find that it's similar. But that said, since doing this, my capacity to juggle things has gotten a lot better. And you can see in medicine, that ends up being what you have to do, right? I've got this developmental pediatrics placement, but also for medicine, I've got a research project that I have to do. And there are also like other things outside of this, right, that I have to do that aren't sort of, I guess, shown in just my timetable here. So I was able to come into medicine having a lot better of a skill set, being prepared to juggle a lot of things than a lot of my fellow peers were, because I'd thrown myself into this stuff early on. And I think a lot of our presumptions will be, okay, you're doing GAMSAT study, that's going to take a lot of time. So GAMSAT study is going to, I guess, be worse because of all the other things that you're doing. But we'll talk about this a bit later on. But I don't think that's necessarily the case, right? If you're doing things exactly like we were talking about before, like doing linguistics or like Latin, because they're things that you enjoy, they're like, I mean, you go into those classes after doing a lot of work and a lot of other stuff, and it's a break, right? It's not like you're doing it because you enjoy it, not because you're forcing yourself to do it. And I think that is something to keep in mind. Towards the end of the like deferred exam, I was doing this because I had to, not because I wanted to. And usually I enjoy uni, but this I did not enjoy at all. And the summer project, I just realized sort of how ill-equipped I was to do this, particularly with work, right? The amount of work time that I had, and this was Monday to Friday, right? I just thought that I'd be able to do stuff, but I wasn't. And that's why this sort of fell south. So yeah, I guess do things that you can, but it's also about planning, right? What is reasonable for me to do? A lot of these things weren't reasonable for me to do. So then I guess the reason why I've been able, because I mean, if you look at what I was like here, I was very, very similar to your average second year and third year medical science student, right? It's these things that I threw myself at, these things that I did that allowed me to sort of gain the skills to put me ahead of the pack now that I'm doing med school, right? There are a lot of skills that I've gained, and it's about, I guess, looking at all the things that you're doing and then thinking, what can I learn from them, right? What went well, what went poorly? So the summer project, what I learned from this was, number one, be realistic with what's reasonable, right? It probably wasn't reasonable for me to do this knowing the obligation that I had to work here. So I guess be realistic with what you can do. I probably wouldn't have done that in retrospect. Another thing that I learned from the summer project was, number two, reach out early. Like I mentioned before, I got really, really stressed at this point. And it was super, super, super tough. Like there was this obligation that I had. The people in the lab were absolutely wonderful, and they set aside all of these things for me to do. And I just really struggled to do all the things that they needed me to do with them. And that's not because there wasn't enough support or because there wasn't that much. It was honestly because I was just sitting there and I was ashamed, I was embarrassed. I was like, oh, I can't do this. This is too difficult. And what I found out, because after this I did an honors year, what I really found out there is that support is there. There are people around you, and it's important to let people know, get in touch and chat to them and say, hey, I'm really struggling with this. Can I have a hand? Or maybe is it reasonable for me to, I guess, tune down the workload a bit? And that's one of the big things that I learned from the summer project here. Now, what did I learn from my deferred exams? Study is difficult alone, right? So the big thing that I noticed here was that all of the friends that I had in MedSci, they weren't studying, they were on holiday. And here I was just studying by myself, right? And I think we sort of leech off other people's motivation and other people's drive. And I really wasn't able to do that. I just struggled to do all of the things that I'd need to. And yeah, that's what I learned there. Now, I guess what else? Now, GAMSAT, I learned a lot. There's a lot of stuff there. Coordinating the society, I learned the big thing really was just, I guess, don't be afraid of being yourself. Now, back in MedSci, if anyone's at UNSW MedSci right now, I think it's changed for the better, but it used to be really, really cliquey. And people were ashamed to talk about doing poorly, right? People were ashamed to talk about their shortcomings. You'd hear everyone talk about how their marks are really good and their marks are really high. And when I was working through this, I was able to talk with a lot of people and I guess get across the impression that like chat about the things that weren't going too well. And it was wonderful because I guess it was almost taboo back then in a medical science program to put forward the idea that maybe you don't want to do medicine or maybe you want to do something else. And I think we're able to change the sentiment there. And then with my relationships, the big thing that I learned here is that I guess by putting these first, you put everything else first. Now, I'll just dot there. But the big thing to keep in mind that I'm trying to say here relating to relationships is that you can do the amount of study that you're doing, the amount of uni, like all the other things. But the thing that's really going to determine how it goes, because I mean, if you think about, no one uses their time perfectly, right? But I think we sort of get the impression that we all do. If we look to other people, especially in like a medical science scenario where it's very, very high intensity, lots of study, I guess everyone tells people, yeah, I'm studying like 4 hours or like 6 hours. It's going really, really well. But that's not really the case. You've always got time to do other things. And I think if you think about if you're doing an assignment and you set aside time to do that assignment, let's say you set aside 3 hours, and then those 3 hours, you didn't actually do the assignment, you procrastinated, you feel terrible, right? That's not a break. That is you, I guess, sitting down to do study and coming out feeling worse than how you went in, right? And that in mind, you've just lost the time. It hasn't been productive and it hasn't been anything like that. So that's a big, big, big factor when you're studying for the GAMSAT, because this is a 4-month, 3-month period leading up to this. It is so difficult, it's so tiring, and you shouldn't study 5 hours a day. You should study less, right? The more time that you put into your relationships, into doing things, into going for bike rides, into playing with your dog, into having hikes and doing the other things that you need to do, you're bringing your stress down, right? And you're allowing yourself, to cope a lot more. And the more stuff that you sort of plan here, you feel better, right? Procrastination and other things like that, they root from anxiety. The more stressed we are, the worse we feel about ourselves, the more likely that it is to happen, right? So the more of this stuff we do counterbalances this out. And as you can see, this is a really good correlate to when I did poorly and also when I did well. So spend more time on relationships. And the other things, I mean, we'll do them. There's a lot of stuff to do there. But like, I guess, go to the movies late at night. If like, of course, schedule and sleep and stuff like that. But when you're thinking, oh, could I study or could I do something else? If you're doing something else that's going out with friends and making you feel good about yourself and what you're doing, then that's usually going to be a lot more valuable than actual study time, right? We'll talk about that a bit more moving forward. What was my sleep schedule like during this time? Good question. Now, it was terrible, but not because of this, right? Okay, I had some other things going on there. And it was honestly better during this than it was during other periods, because my sleep is really, really tied to my anxiety and my stress levels. And I think here I was a lot less stressed, at least during the GAMSAT, than I would be normally, right? And that said, it didn't feel like everything was going well. It didn't feel like I was getting on top of things, but I was going through a process, and that was great at grounding me, right? So my sleep schedule wasn't phenomenal, but it was better than what it was second year and what it was third year, right? So I think the takeaway there is that my sleep was good comparatively, right? I'm just gonna have a check at the Q&A. Did I prepare a portfolio? How did I juggle uni exams? Yeah, I'll chat about that. Okay. So now, when we think about stress, right, this is a big thing that plays into GAMSAT. And stress can be helpful, right? This is a stress performance curve, and it's a bit interesting. If you've seen psychology, this term may look fine, but if you haven't seen psychology stuff, it might look a bit weird. Arousal is just, I guess, how stressed we are, how engaged we are with things, and it's really analogous to stress for what we're talking about here. But you can sort of see that our performance is tied to stress. If we're moderately stressed, then our performance is going to be pretty high, right? But when we ramp up the stress, if we feel like we're not doing well enough, and then we second guess whether or not we're doing things as well as we need to, then we begin to have impaired performance, right? Things don't go as well. We feel worse about ourselves. And this is exactly what I think was responsible for, like I've said, the things that I did poorly and the things that I did well in, just how I felt, right? Now, this in mind, whenever I'm thinking about how stressed I am, I'm keeping an eye out. If I'm ever like above this level of stress when I'm preparing for the GAMSAT, then that's an indicator for me that I need to take more time off. I need to do something else. I need to get away from this, because once I'm sort of beyond here, it's way, way, way too easy to throw yourself off the other side and then become burnt out. And I think if I look at all the students that I tutor, I've tutored over the past 3 years, I've probably tutored 500 students, personal tutorials rather than actually classes. If we count classes, then the number's way, way, way higher. But the people who do poorly on GAMSAT, it's far, far, far more tied to burnout rather than actual ability, background knowledge, or anything like that. And that's the reason why this is the main thing that I'm focusing on in this presentation. Now, I'll talk about how to put together a study plan amongst all the things that you're doing. But I think on top of everything, you really, really have to look to make sure you're not getting burnt out and you feel okay about what's happening, right? This is so important, one, for the GAMSAT, but two, the study strategies that you use and how you compose yourself when you reach out for help, all of these things, the habits that you create now are going to be what you carry on to continue doing later on. And there are so many burnt out med students, so many. And the difference between people who are burnt out and aren't burnt out, some people are fortunate enough to be intrinsically resistant to burnout, but that may work for undergraduate. It's not going to work for medicine because there's so much more stuff, so many more things that make us question whether or not we're good enough, just like you might be feeling with the GAMSAT. And the biggest thing that I guess stops me from burning out, and it has happened 2 or 3 times across the past 2 years, but it's when I'm in a position where I'm struggling and things aren't going too well, I step back, I reach out for help, I disengage from this stuff. What did I actually do on Friday? I took a day off, right? And it's not ideal to miss placement, but I looked at this and I realized there's a lot. I've done this, this, and this, and I just haven't had, like, and I had a 5:30 a.m. shoot. I haven't had time to sort of, I guess, think about what I need to do. I need this day off. This was 2 days ago, right? I'm noticing that my stress levels are getting a bit too high. Even though this is important, I take a day off, and I invigilated an exam yesterday and now I'm doing a seminar. I'm feeling great. I'm feeling really, really good because I put myself in a position where that was something that I allowed for myself. Now, if you've never experienced burnout or gotten really stressed or concerned or worried about whether or not you're good enough, then it will happen, right? Because GAMSAT is extraordinarily, I want to say difficult, but it's not difficult, it's challenging, right? It's difficult to know what the correct things to do to study are. And if you're doing study how we would have usually for university exams, then it's not going to work phenomenally, right? Okay, so I will get back to this in a bit. Now, stress can be helpful, as we've talked about, where you can get up to this level and it increases your performance, right? But the assumptions that need to be made for stress to actually be helpful, first, we need to know and understand the thing that we're stressing about, right? Say that, like, I can't think of a good example here, so I'm going to use a bad example. Say that you've got like a suspicion that someone's going to drop, I don't know, a stink bomb in your mailbox, right? And you don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen at some point, right? And that terrifies you. You look at it every day and you're like, oh, is there a stink bomb in there? God, I want to get like all the mail that I've been getting, but is there a stink bomb, right? Now, when you're in the scenario, when you go up to the mailbox, like you're worried about that. But if you could look retrospectively and think, oh no, that's fine. He didn't chuck the stink bomb in there until July, then you could spend every month leading up to that going to your mailbox stress-free, right? But I guess without knowing that, you're stressing about it all the time. And the big thing that I want to get into with this is actually GAMSAT, right? So if you think about GAMSAT, right, this is a graph. And apologies, because if you're studying for the GAMSAT, then these are going to be familiar, but I like graphs, so this is what we're going to use. If we look at how well we're doing, how much we know, and how well equipped we are to actually sit the exam, then across time, it's always going to look like this, right? We're always going to get better and better. But the trouble is, if we chuck in a second y-axis, and this is blue, right? So we chuck in a second y-axis here, which is how well I feel I'm doing. This graph looks like this. Now, in my exams that I've sat, there's never been a time when I've come out of my exams and actually felt that went well, I don't need to sit again or anything like that. Every time that I've done my exam, my GAMSAT, like the actual thing, I've sat there and thought, wow, that was terrible. I'll either need to do that again or I'll need to give up, right? And it's not until I get the score back that I realize where I was. Now, your GAMSAT, how well you're actually doing curve could look like this. It could look like this. Or if you're not keeping an eye out for yourself when you get burnt out, it could look like this, right? And I guess the biggest thing that you can look at for your GAMSAT study and actually make a judgment on whether or not the study that you're doing is working is nothing, right? Look for your burnout. That's the only thing that you can do. Look for how well you're feeling, but you're never going to feel like you're doing well, right? If you think about back to high school, when we learned mathematics for the first time, if you're learning how to do algebra or like fractions or something like that, the first 5 or 6 times that you do algebra or fractions, the first 5 or 6 days, you feel like nothing's working, like it doesn't work, like it just doesn't fit, right? Or any complex mathematical concept that's taken a while to get. And you don't feel like you're making progress until a moment, right? There's a moment when you realize, wait a second, I get it now, it makes sense. And it sort of looks like this, where it's like, okay, I understand nothing. Oh, I get it, cool, I'm pretty good at fractions, right? Now GAMSAT, more so for section 3 and section 1. Section 2, you can have an okay idea, but it's still the same rule applies. For the GAMSAT, it's exactly like that, but you never get to the point where you actually feel like you know what's going on, right? You don't get to the point where things make sense and you realize, oh, I do know this. Wow, this is great. You're never going to feel that way. It is always going to feel like you're doing terribly. I mean, if you look at the mock exams that we did yesterday, the average score that people's getting is in between 30% to 50%. And that doesn't translate to, I guess, the mark that you'll get in the actual exam. But if you think about it, a lot of our students score well. So you think about, where do the people who get 80s come from? It's the people on the high ends getting a bit less than 50%. But if you were to get 40% in a university exam or 45%, you'd look at that and then you'd think, wow, that's terrible. I really need to do something different. I'm doing a horrible job here. But you can see here, because of the nature of the exam, the percent mark, our initial response to that really isn't going to tell us much about how well we're doing, right? And that's a big portion of why the GAMSAT feels like this, because it's a low scoring exam. If you want a 70, maybe get like a 60 or a 55% sort of thing. And then that'll get you a 70. And noting like our exams tend to be a touch more difficult than what people actually see, but it's relatively like, I guess, it uses the same logical reasoning approaches and stuff like that. And it's helpful to learn with, as we can see with these learning curves here. But if you're just looking at this, then you're never going to actually feel like you're doing well. And if you do a set of practice questions, if you get 35% and then you improve and now you're getting 55%, the difference between that is in a 5-question STEM, right? Before you were getting what, 1.5 questions correct? Now you're getting 2.5 questions correct. That doesn't look like an improvement, but if you're looking at percentiles with 35%, maybe you were sitting at the bottom 15th percentile. But with 50%, now you're sitting at the 75th percentile. With that change, you've overtaken 50% of people in the course and your marks have skyrocketed. But that in mind, it doesn't feel like it, right? Because you've only improved to the extent where instead of getting 1.5 correct per 5-question STEM, you're now getting, what did I say? 2 correct, 2.5. So the big thing that I want to nail home here is that we never can actually track too well how we're doing in the GAMSAT. We don't know and understand the thing that we're stressing about, right? This is super difficult to get an outlook on how well we're actually doing in GAMSAT study. So I guess to ground us again, we're talking about assumptions made, which need to be made for stress to be able to help us. So if we don't know and understand the thing that we're stressing about, the stress isn't helpful. So we need to look at that stress as an output and then use that to tone it down. Am I studying too much? Is this becoming too difficult? If that's the case, tone it down, right? Now, this feeds into the next point, which is for stress to be helpful, the stress is able to change our trajectory to something more beneficial than what would have happened otherwise, right? If us being stressed when we're looking at the fart bomb in our mailbox, if we think it's there, if that means that now we're wearing like armored clothing or whatever, like if we're wearing like a peg over our nose before we go there so that we're not affected by that, and that's come from the stress. I mean, you think about it in terms of like a social scenario, maybe it's a bit weird, but like you could look at that in a position where the stress has helped you do something to protect yourself. And if the stress is causing you to study not more, but more effectively, then wonderful, right? But again, that's us looking, my stress going from here up to here. But if it goes beyond there, then it's too easy to just fall over the top and then feel like we're doing terrible and burn out, right? So stress isn't terribly helpful. So I guess any scenario where we can do more things in our relationships, spend more time by ourselves, take breaks, watch movies, it's wonderful. It will always help. And then 3, if we're stressing a suitable amount based on the task we're concerned about, jumping back to this, I mean, the amount of stress that we have is not at all correlated to how well we're doing. So we can never know whether we're stressing about like a reasonable amount based on the task that we're doing, because it's not an outlook, or it's not an output from our study that actually is tied to how well we're doing. So the big thing here is, regardless of how much stuff you're doing, if you study consistently, right, in consistent, I guess, time points and stuff like that, but we keep the volume relatively low and we make sure that we're doing okay mentally, then we'll do well. And then we look at it like, okay, how much does this amount of study stress me? If this amount of study stresses me only this much, that's great, because I have the capacity to study a bit more, get a bit stressed, and then that can help more, but not too much, right? So using stress as an output to see how I'm feeling, let that define how much I should study. When I'm studying, I'm more engaged because I'm actually enjoying it rather than forcing myself to study when it's not helpful. And also as well, I guess you're looking to see, is there more I can do? Because that's going to be different person to person. Okay, so if we look at an individualized study plan, I think if you're doing well, around about 2 hours a day is fine, but anything down to 30 minutes or 20 minutes a day can be fine as well. For me, like I mentioned, procrastination was difficult, both with GAMSAT and other things, and being in the classroom was amazing, but actually doing study, when I got home, I just didn't feel like I was with it, right? And I would just really feel off. So for me, what I did, first thing, I made sure I stayed consistent. Now, if we look at my timetable where I was studying, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, what I'd do, I study the best in the evenings. So at around about 5 p.m., I would do 20 minutes, right? Every day. Now I had one day off, which would be either Saturday or Sunday. But here, because I'm doing 20 minutes, when I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, oh, like say for instance that we did 2.5 hours instead. When you go into doing that, that may be intimidating. It may feel like a lot. And you're looking at it like, I don't feel like I want to actually do this. This is terrible. Like I don't feel good about studying. You may study, you may push yourself through for 2.5 hours, but it's not going to be as useful as the study that you do when you're engaged and when you're enjoying it, right? So for me, this 20 minutes, because I'm only looking at 20 minutes of study when it's like 4:30, I know I've got 20 minutes of study coming up. It's not something that's going to throw me off, and I'm not going to procrastinate for it. I'm definitely going to do it, right? So I do that 20 minutes of study. And then every time that I feel like I'm on a roll and things are going well, I let that 20 minutes expand to however long I feel like it, right? And based on, I guess, just how I work through these things, maybe 2 or 3 days a week, it'd be 4 hours of study that I do, right? And let's say that happens twice. And on other days, I start with 20 minutes of study and I'm like, wait a second, not feeling too much like this. Let's do section 2 instead, right? And I'll do section 2. Now, what you can see here is these 20 minutes, I mean, you add 20 minutes together. Oh, my maths isn't phenomenal, but that's around about 1 hour and 40 minutes that I'm doing in the whole week, right? That's not nearly as much as these cumulative 4-hour time periods here. And if you look at how effective these 4-hour time periods are, so much more because my mind is there and I actually feel like I'm doing what I want to. Now, the other thing as well, if I'm ever at home or anywhere and I notice, wait a second, I've got like, I want to study. I really, really want to study. Then I'll do that. I'll let that take off, right? And that might be like 2 or 3 times a week, maybe in the morning, where I just want to chuck in like 1.5 hours or like 2 hours. Okay, so I'm generally a chaotic person, but this is what worked for me. And I think don't force yourself to study. Like first and foremost, don't force yourself to study if you're not feeling good while you're doing it, because the study won't actually be effective and it won't be that helpful. For me, this allowed me to, I guess, keep consistent, make sure that I wasn't falling out of things, right? Because 20 minutes isn't something that I'm intimidated by. But if I plan to study for 4 hours, no way am I doing that. I'm not feeling too good. And amongst this, I had the classes and I had everything keeping me together, and that was perfect. So just check the chat. Did you eat dinner on time? When I say 5 p.m., I'm saying 5 p.m. as an example. I think for me, it was 8:30 p.m. And like I mentioned, my sleep schedule was out. So every time that I'm doing this for 4 hours, that ended me up at 12:30 p.m. at night, or 12:30 a.m. actually. And it takes me a while to wind down for bed. So I'll probably watch a movie for 2.5 hours and then I get to bed at 3. That's a me problem. And like I said, that's different, right? The big thing about this is that you've got to look at things and think, what works for me, right? If study intimidates you or you feel like things aren't feeling good when you're studying, then integrate something like this, which can work. And then reflect on it, make adaptations, right? What did work? What didn't work? What can I do better the next time that I head off and do it? And this was the process. I was looking through all of this stuff and then thinking about how better to improve it, right? And when I'm studying for med now, I'm doing the exact same thing. Like I do research when I feel like it, but that said, like I've got time points when I have to do things because I've got a literature review coming up and I need to do that at some point, but I'm putting aside 20-minute blocks, and those 20-minute blocks usually expand to at least an hour, right? Same for study for actual med school. I'll do that too. But as well, if I'm in a scenario where I've just got a break or I'm doing not much at all, and then I get motivation to study, I'll take that and I'll go with it, right? So I guess this will not suit everyone. And the majority of study plans that can be thrown at you, I mean, like Jake, Raman, all the other people who have gone through these seminars We all talk about things that work, but it's not what works, it's what works for you, because everyone's different, right? And yeah, I guess so. Big takeaways from this are it's super, super important to use stress as an output to, I guess, gauge how well you're actually doing, and listen to it. Take breaks when you need to. Now, if you are struggling to study, or if you don't have enough time to study, it doesn't have to be a long time, it just has to be consistent, right? And if you're working full time like I was, then when you're actually putting in these blocks, if you're not feeling it, that's fine, go to bed. Like, go watch a movie, go do something else, right? So I'm just gonna check the chat. What were the most high yield things you'd suggest doing for the GAMSAT? Doing like actual questions are really, really high yield, because it's not background knowledge that gets you there. Background knowledge will, if you don't have a science background, definitely work through, I guess, all the individual things that you'd need to know for a first year chemistry, biology course, and like year 12 physics, right? That'll definitely be helpful. But most high yield for students that I see that are neglected, number one, mathematics. If you struggle with mathematics, that's not just a physics problem, that's a chemistry problem, and also a biology problem. You get genetics questions, you get experimental biology questions, you get graphical biology questions that rely on mathematics. So if you notice that there's trouble with your mathematical skills, then force yourself to do mathematics, right? And this is another good thing about studying like this, because a lot of the time we just study what's easy instead of what we actually need to. When you're studying in smaller chunks, it's so much easier to force yourself to study for the things that are important rather than the things that are easier. It's so easy to just go through questions and not reflect and stuff like that. Okay, I'm just looking at the Q&A now. If I'm procrastinating a lot on my GAMSAT and study due to high stress, what advice do I have to combat this? I'm gonna be a bit, this is it. This is my advice to combat this. Like, I mean, that's what this chat is about, right? The biggest things are look at how you're doing, look at how you're stressing, and take breaks when you need to. Don't force yourself to do things when you're not feeling it, right? Take breaks when needed. And if that's for a week, then what that's telling you is, wow, you're super, super, super burnt out, and any study that you were forcing yourself to do anyway wasn't actually that helpful, right? If you're studying when you're burnt out, if you're going to work when you're burnt out, like, I mean, that's when we see in medicine, doctors make mistakes. And it's super important to be on top of this, right? So this is my advice. Break things down into small chunks. When you have the motivation, let it expand to bigger amounts, and keep an eye out for your stress. Okay. The other questions are quite non-specific, so I'm just going to move on, and then I'll come back to them at the end. Now, this is the trajectory of my life afterwards, right? So the first GAMSAT, this GAMSAT here, like I mentioned, it was very, very experimental, and I was doing a lot of things that I wasn't used to. I had a lot on my plate. I didn't end up with a phenomenal, well, I ended up with a good score, but it wasn't amazing, and it definitely wasn't the 74 that they chucked on the title. I got 68 for this. Now, that said, I want to break this down, because for me, this was like 68 is not sort of giving the whole picture. Section 3, I think I got 80. Section 2, I'll come back to later. Section 1 would have been like 60 to 67, something in that range. Maybe let's call it like 64 sort of thing. Well, it might have been 65 or something like that. Now, section 2, one thing that's interesting about ACER is that if you, or I guess the exam from what we see, if you're writing and you misread the theme that they give you, then they're going to look at that and they're going to be thinking, wait a second, this person doesn't actually, like, they're not actually writing this. They've memorized something from home, and then they're responding that essay to this theme because it doesn't fit the theme. Now, in section 2, I think I misread the essay, and I thought it was climate change, but it was actually a bit more specific on sustainable development, which is super frustrating, because the second essay that I wrote, I think, was probably the best essay that I've, even after these other sittings and after like teaching and stuff like that, it's the best essay that I've ever written, right? But I ended up with a 51 in section 2 because of that. And the only way that I can sort of look at that and like come to terms with that is they've probably looked at my essay and then seen that I was writing something that was quite a bit different from what the theme was, not too different, right, but a bit different. And they've thought that I was just reciting something off the top of my head. And this would probably be an average of the first essay being like an 80 and the second essay being like a 31, right? That's probably how I got this score, because I guess if they're looking at it and they don't think you're actually making a genuine response, then that's that. What was my best essay on? I've written so many that it's only the one that was terrible that I remembered, unfortunately. I forget what it was on, something introspective, and like you think about introspective stuff. I mean, this whole talk, I'm telling you to introspect, right? Keep an eye out for stress, keep an eye out for burnout, make sure you're doing okay. Like, I mean, I deserve that, right? I deserve that mark, just gonna say. So then I did my second GAMSAT. Now, second GAMSAT was nice because I sort of showed myself. And the problem is, after I came out of this one, I didn't feel like I did well. And this really didn't, like, this score, I was looking at it and I thought, maybe it was a fluke. Maybe I don't actually deserve it. Maybe I'm not too good at this. I did the second exam and I felt the exact same thing, right? I felt like I was doing terrible. And that said, I came out of it. I thought, oh, that's okay. I've got the other GAMSAT to fall back on. And then I got a 72, right? Now this graph is also, and sorry to chuck so many of these in here, but you can see how important this is. This is also stress over time. So I got relatively stressed here. And this, I mean, if you take this in reference for everything else, this is close to the most stressed I've been, I guess, when we're talking about starting GAMSAT, when I was doing the summer project, when I did poorly in the deferred exams and with my relationship stuff going on, right? This is a very, very, very high amount of stress. And then I guess I get to the second GAMSAT, my stress is lower, I do even better, right? And that's the biggest correlate. I felt good about myself going into this exam. I wasn't wondering whether or not I'd be able to get into medicine. And because I was in such a position where I had so much more leveled of a head, I think that's what I can account to doing this better, and also not misreading the prompt and then getting the essay thrown me off. Now, the interview that I did, I interviewed at, I think, Canberra, ANU, and then I got an offer. I got an offer at Griffith University, but I wanted to do honours after this project that I did back here, the first one, because this was still amazing. And even though this project didn't go well, I didn't think that I could come to terms with doing medicine and then leaving research by itself and never giving myself the opportunity to do it ever again, right? So I needed to do honours, I really did. And I think despite declining the medicine offer and maybe never getting into medicine again, I think it was really, really important for me to do this. And I still think in this honours year, I learned so much about myself that it was absolutely worth it. But if you can see, before then, in a very, very, very stressful time of my life, like, honours for me was terrible in terms of the amount of stress that I had. I mean, someone who's this chaotic, who has this stuff going on, right? I'm in a position where I can sort of reflect on this and tell you how to avoid this, because even for people who aren't as chaotic as me, every GAMSAT student that I see goes through the same cycle, just to less of a degree than what I do, right? I learned the most about myself in honours. This was such a difficult, but such a learning-filled year. I mean, if we look at the things that I learned here, the things that I learned were from number one, number two, number three, the three things that I did poorly in. And then I learned something from something that I didn't think would go too well because I just threw myself at it, right? So this was the exact same. I learned more about myself in this year than I did through anything else because I threw myself into something difficult. And then here, I had a medicine interview, and then I got into UWA and I moved into state. And you can see how much less stressful this was for me. For one, I also needed to develop, I noticed I was staying at home with my parents and I didn't get too many opportunities to develop the skills that I'd need to normally. So I wanted to move into state regardless of what happened, just to be able to sort of develop the soft skills that I need to live life, right? And I guess my stress has been up and down. I've had life stuff happen, like moving house is difficult. I've moved house 3 times since living at a home. And also as well, like, we always run into troubles, especially while doing such a big degree like medicine. Yeah, so I've had stuff happen, but nothing nearly as stressful as honours. And I think the reason why these stress levels aren't nearly as high as honors is because I've done this and I've been able to learn from it, right? Because I've learned from this and then made adaptive changes to sort of work out what I can best do to, I guess, reach out for help early. All the things that I'm talking about with stress, right? Like, I guess, be realistic with what I can do, stuff like that. I haven't gotten this stressed again. I've gotten relatively stressed, but it's been okay. And now things are going great. Now that I'm in 2023, I'm cruising along and I'm still doing the same amounts. And you look at, if you want to be a clinician scientist or you want to be a doctor, you're going to have so many different things on your plate that it is so, so, so important, regardless of whether or not you actually are juggling a lot of things, to learn how to, right? Especially a lot of undergraduate students who come into the medicine program, like they're already in. They never have an opportunity where they're forced to learn these things about themselves, and they really struggle going into the clinical rotations, right? So if GAMSAT is just one thing, let it be an opportunity for you to learn these things about yourself, become a better person and a better doctor, and someone who's more resilient, who knows how to look out for when you're not doing as well as you want to be doing or as you should be doing. And I guess another thing that comes into being a better person is relationships. Spend more time with people, right? Do things that you enjoy, develop hobbies, do linguistics, like do all these other things. Like I'm just an okay friend and partner, right? But this is stuff that I'm working on. It's stuff that I'm continually trying to get better at. And I think this is an opportunity for you to do the same thing so that when you move into medicine and everything piles on, it's okay, because I guess you know what to do. Yeah, so I hope this helped. The other thing that I wanted to mention as well, my 3 GAMSAT settings, number 1, number 2, number 3. I didn't really study at all for GAMSAT number 2. GAMSAT number 3, exact same thing. And also, by the way, GAMSAT number 3, like my section 3 was like 86 or something like that. Like I'm getting better every time. And I did start teaching here. So that was good study for me for section 3. But the biggest correlate between these GAMSAT marks is how stressed I was. The more stressed I am, the worse I've done. And the less stressed I am, the better I've done. And my timetable was equally, if not more, I guess, hectic in this one and in this one as well. But I knew more about myself. I knew how to juggle things better, right? Yeah, so I'll look through the Q&A. There's a lot of stuff there. Shoot through any questions that you have. So as for becoming independent, what was the first time moving out and living on my own? Like when I moved into state, you still would live with your parents and you feel like you're so behind on adult stuff. It's exactly the same as this, right? The things that went poorly, but more embarrassing, right? Because when you've got to like, I don't know, like call your mom and be like, hey, all my clothes are ruined because I chucked them in a hot wash and like none of them are suitable for a hot wash. They're all like elastane and stuff like that. That's embarrassing. And people make fun of you. Like when you're saying like, how do I clean a shower? How do I like do these things? How do I cook, right? They're things that people just look at and think it's easy, it's fine, it's just normal human stuff. But I guess that sort of goes to show that when you think about how difficult medicine is, it's not too difficult. It's just we have a skill set that other people don't have, right? And they're not used to this sort of stuff. The amount that we can sort of handle here is bigger because we've gone through this process, but we've done a degree, we've done the GAMSAT, we've done medicine, and then we've learned how to cope. And everyone else has to do that for, I guess, stuff at home, right? Like cooking, cleaning, doing dishes, taking out the rubbish, all this other stuff, like, and then keeping on track of stuff, like, but yeah, it's the exact same. You're gonna mess stuff up. You're gonna mess tons and tons and tons of stuff up. And every time it's about learning from that, right? How can I better coordinate myself about doing like particular things? I mean, if I were to show you my study right now, for the time being, it's very, very messy. And I'm not gonna show it to you because I'm embarrassed, right? But like, you're not gonna be perfect at these things, but like you get better bit by bit if you're listening to yourself and thinking all of these things that I've done, how can I reflect on it? Did I use phrases for every sitting? No, only the first sitting. But that said, I used the resources that I had left over from the first sitting and the second and the third sitting. And I think me doing it the first time, I probably wouldn't have gotten even close to the score that I did, the 68 initially, if I didn't, because the trouble is there is so much misinformation online about how to do well on the GAMSAT, and almost a lot of courses are just like, oh, do the science better, or like read about this, when it's absolutely more so about putting yourself in the experience and then working through questions, seeing what works for you, seeing what doesn't work for you, and being able to reflect and look, okay, I did this question, I got this question wrong. What could I have done better in the future, right? So I think doing it in the first one set me on the trajectory for this and this. Okay, any recommendations on resources or drills? Relevant math skills. There are a lot of really good things online, like Khan Academy is a wonderful resource that's free. Just going through like basic algebra stuff there and everything else is very, very helpful. Also as well, just general year 12 physics. I mean, if you look at HSC, like in Sydney, they've got tons and tons of practice papers. If you can do them, then you're going to have the majority of things that you need to know for physics in the GAMSAT. Just keep an eye out for differences, right? There are going to be a lot of calculations that you wouldn't be able to do without a calculator. But that said, try to do them anyway, because you're going to have to do stuff without a calculator in the GAMSAT anyway. Did you get a tutor for your first? Yes, I did get a tutor for my first sitting. So this was when I did the comprehensive course, and that's when I had the tutor and everything there. Second sitting, third sitting, like I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't have been able to do this without this first time, because I needed that that experience to be able to see what the exam's actually like, and then that set me on this trajectory, right? What else? Any advice for section 2? Look, I mean, if you're like me and you don't feel like you're doing well when it's not actually the case, be yourself, right? Same thing that I was saying that I learned when I was coordinating this society. Don't be afraid of being yourself. Write about things that you're passionate about. And then if you send it off, it gets marked, and then someone's like, oh, this is terrible, right? Reflect on it. Was it terrible? Are there any things that I can fix there? Also as well, I mean, it's a person who's marking it. If you've written something that's absolutely phenomenal that just ticked off the person who was marking it, then maybe there's nothing that you need to improve. Maybe you just got unlucky with how it was marked, right? So write about things that you're interested in. Like when you're reading news articles, read news articles about things that make you mad, right? Things that we could be doing better. Like, I don't know, like for me, one of my big essays was on, it's interesting because it's changed, it's not true anymore, but tuberculosis is really the biggest cause of death in the world. And in the developed world in particular, because like, despite us being able to treat it, there's just such a mismatch of resources being allocated to people who need it, right? And that pissed me off so much. And that was what one of my essays was about. And it was a good essay, right? I forget exactly which one it was and if it was for the actual exam, but talking about things that you're passionate about is so much easier than just trying to make an opinion about something that you don't know about. And if there's something that you don't know about that slightly interests you, but you don't know that much, find out about it, read some articles, and get frustrated or like get enthusiastic, get passionate, right? That's my advice there. I have shared my score for my 3 sittings. How do I juggle the uni exams with GAMSAT right around the corner? This is a brilliant question, right? So for anyone who didn't catch it, before I had a week where I had Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, I had neuronat exam, molecular cellular neurobiology exam, and then GAMSAT. Now, this is going to probably take a few people off guard, but I probably wouldn't have done as well in the GAMSAT if I didn't have these. And the reason why is because if you have just the GAMSAT coming up, you're going to force yourself to study for the week. And of course you would, because that's what's useful for everything else that you do, right? But the study isn't going to get you to a point where you feel like the marks that you're getting are enough, and you're just going to stress more and more and more. For me, these exams, like I was terrified of the GAMSAT. I was absolutely horrified. I've got it coming up in a week. This sucks, right? So as my coping mechanism, I threw myself at these exams. And this was like a week and a half in advance sort of thing. I still did the mock exam beforehand, but doing these ones, I was really, really able to get an outlet. I was able to, I guess, be able to occupy my time with something that wasn't stress. Because regardless of how much you study for the GAMSAT, you're never going to feel like you're doing well, right? And by doing these exams, that allowed me to focus on something, have less time just being able to stress about everything that I was unsure about, and then doing this. The GAMSAT, I did next to nothing. I did maybe 2 essays in this week, and I did 2 or 3 practice questions. But when I started off doing practice questions, my stress just went through the roof. So I focused on this, and that helped, right? Stress is the biggest factor in this exam, and anything that can get you away from that, whether it's friends, whether it's other exams, that's helpful. I probably wouldn't have gotten as good of a score as I did on this first sitting if I hadn't done these 2, right? Did I prepare a portfolio? What made me choose UWA over unis in Sydney? So I was really fortunate where I actually had a sister living in Western Australia. And this was, I mean, if we look at this trajectory, right? 2020, when I started honours, this is when, what happened here in 2020, early on in 2020, Q&A, audience engagement, what happened? COVID, right? Yeah, COVID happens. And so from here onwards, COVID, right? Now, my sister, for 2 of these years, she lived in Spain, or a year she lived in Spain. And then I forget what happened, but for whatever reason, she moved straight to Perth with her partner. And then we didn't really get to see her at all for a 2-year period. And at this time, she was really, really struggling. And I was just sitting there and thinking, I was like, I want to be able to see my sister. I want to spend time with my sister. The borders are closed. That's fine. I get a medicine offer. I'll be able to go there, right? And I mean, the first house that I lived in for 4 months was with my sister, and that was absolutely wonderful. And then her partner and her split, and because he was the one from Perth, she's now living back in Sydney. But I had that wonderful, wonderful insulation when I came into Perth, that she was able to help me out with all the, I don't know, the life stuff, the washing and stuff like that. And that's why I put this as high of a preference as I did. And it was wonderful to have this as the excuse to move away, because otherwise I probably would have moved to Melbourne or Queensland or Canberra, somewhere closer. And now I can see that this was the right decision to make, regardless of whether or not my sister lived in Perth, but I wouldn't have made that decision otherwise. Throw yourself into the abyss. This is what I was talking about before, where it's like all these things that you're unconfident about that you don't think are going to work out well. Throw yourself at them, and then you'll learn things, right? Okay. How do you study organic chemistry for someone from a non-science background? People from science backgrounds suck at organic chemistry because they think it's exactly like the actual stuff is. It's pattern recognition and it doesn't look like it. I think the functional groups you've got to work on and you've got to learn, but the reactions you don't have to know. It is pattern recognition. Look at the atoms that you have and how the connectivity changes between them. Organic chemistry is something that I skipped for this first GAMSAT, and same with electricity, but you can still get an 80 in section 3 by skipping organic chemistry and electricity questions. I was just terrified about them because I didn't really understand them. But that said, when I actually started teaching, I realized, oh, wait a second, this is the easiest part of the exam. And I think that's what bumped up my S3 mark this high, sort of thing. So throw yourself at things, just give them a shot, even though they don't feel like they're going well. You can't afford the comprehensive course. Would I recommend other courses like essentials? Yeah, absolutely. I think you've got so comprehensive, and then you've got the concentrated course. I think if you're getting like PBLs where you're actually going through questions and hearing other people going through them, that's phenomenal. But that said as well, I think just having questions which are representative of the logical reasoning style that you're actually going to need to use in the exam, super, super, super important and super helpful to have. And I absolutely recommend the other courses. How do you improve on pattern recognition? Throw yourself at them, have a go. Like I know ACE's paper has a reasonable amount of organic chemistry questions in there, and they can be helpful to go through. Absolutely, just see some questions. So you asked this before, but was GAMSAT study right before uni exams? Yeah, it absolutely was. Yeah. Okay, so are there any other questions? We've dropped a few people while I've been chatting to and about myself, but I guess if no one else has anything to ask, then thanks for coming. It's great to meet you all. And I think just the biggest thing that I want to mention here is that it's going to be okay. I know it feels like you've got this big, massive hurdle in front of you, and how can you know whether or not it's going to go well? Like, you don't know. And because of that, why worry? You know, like there's one of my favorite, I guess, thought processes that was written out by, he's a doctor now, actually in Melbourne, but he just sent this through to us. So first ask yourself, do you have a problem? So let's say that's yes. Then, okay, if it was no, right, then don't worry. Because of course, you don't have a problem. Why would you need to worry? Okay, so if you do have a problem, then you ask yourself, can you do something about it? So can you do something about it? If it's yes, okay, cool. Don't worry about it. If it's no, if you can't do anything about it, then don't worry. Why are we stressing about something that we can't change? We're going to get a stink bomb in our mailbox anyway, right? I live my life by this, and I take this on board. There's one thing that you take on board, it's just this. So yeah, thanks a lot for that, Elaine. I think, I don't know, it takes a lot of, it's interesting being a medical student because everyone sort of looks at you, especially pre-med people, like everything's worked out and everything's going well, and like they actually listen to you and take in your opinions. But like, I mean, if you see me in the hospital, I'm just waddling around, like I've got no idea what I'm doing. And like, like, I think everyone sort of feels that way in a particular position, but it's just, I don't know, don't be ashamed to sort of tell people about your experiences and stuff like that. If you're stressed out, other people probably are too. They're just not talking about it. So talk with your friends about this. That's okay, Mariam. It's great to teach you, and thank you for being so interactive. Also, I think it's great about, yeah, absolutely throw yourself in the deep end. Yeah, no, that's okay. All good. Wonderful. Well, I'll leave you guys to it. As you can see, I'm in Perth, and it is 5:30 p.m. for me. I'm going to go take my dog to the dog park. Oh, actually, do you guys want to see my dog? Do you care about my dog? I care a lot about my dog. I can show you my dog if you want. Okay, I will be back in, all I need is one yes, right? I'll be back in a few minutes. Leave if you don't care. It's pretty sad, right? But that's okay. I'll be All right, this is Luna. She is a 6-month-old Jack Russell who's just learnt to bark, so we're not getting any sleep anymore. But yeah, she's absolutely wonderful. Yeah, say hello to everyone. I love showing her to everyone because yeah, she is very cute. Okay, cool. Thanks for sticking around, everyone. Good luck. And yeah, I'll probably catch you all somewhere down the track, whether it's in a course, in whether that's phrases or medical school or in the hospital. So yeah, I guess just keep being good people and keep on looking out for yourself, right? Okay, cool. Catch you all later. Have a good one.